Prime Minister Modi refers to himself as having been sent by God.
I read a really cheeky tweet saying, first I thought he wasn't logical, but now it seems he's also not biological.
We are now going to talk about why the Reserve Bank of India has started becoming less independent.
Can we ever be in a situation in India, a government, because of a surplus it receives, actually reduces tax burden on its people?
Thinking about a recalibration of GST, which is really important. Households are feeling the pinch. Debt levels have risen.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 17 of the India Dialogue. We're so grateful that you're here. My name is Ruchir. I'm joined by my co-hosts, as always, Mitali and Manu. Mitali is well known for her work at CNBC. She's the director of journalism at Reuters Institute, and she's an author of the book Crypto Crimes. Manu is an advocate out of Chennai, runs his own law practice, and is a spokesperson for DMK. I am Ruchir. I'm the CEO at Distributed Energy and chair at the School of Policy and Governance. As always, every week, we unpack issues that matter in India. We've been unpacking a lot of the comments and issues recently through the election. We've now been through phase 5 of the election, 2 more phases to go. We're getting closer and closer to June 4th. As we do that, we try and go through a range of what's happened as well as unpack stories we find interesting. As part of that, Mitali will take us through the election roundup of where we are.
Yeah, thank you, Ruchir. As always, we've sort of got our spotlight on it, and it feels a little bit like the slog overs. Earlier this week, we had the 5th phase that was quite high profile, I think, in terms of some of the names that were going to the electorate to seek their vote. So Rahul Gandhi, BJP leaders like Rajnath Singh, Smriti Irani, Piyush Goyal, a few other non-BJP faces like Chirag Paswan, Umar Abdullah. So this one had quite a few big names in it. The 6th phase is scheduled for Saturday, the 25th of May, I think. That's about 58 constituencies, again, split across many states and union territories. But the important things to watch would be Delhi, where all 7 seats go to vote. Uttar Pradesh, of course, West Bengal, Bihar, and I think in a few bits, places like Haryana and Jharkhand as well. We've been discussing so much of sort of the nitty-gritties of it. So maybe a good place to start is what's caught your individual eyes in terms of election developments this last week. Manu, would you like to go first?
Yeah, as you rightly said, Mitali, last week was largely focused around Delhi. Though Delhi has only 7 seats, as you know, we all know, it enjoys a disproportionate amount of share in terms of media space. And of course, Delhi has been in the news more than ever because of the arrest of Arvind Kejriwal. We've sort of unpacked the Enforcement Directorate actions against Kejriwal and his own sort of rebuttals on it quite a bit. So Delhi, started on a sort of a very aggressive note. There were allegations made by a sitting Rajya Sabha member of parliament belonging to the Aam Aadmi Party, Swati Maliwal, against her own chief minister, Arvind Kejriwal, and particularly his official aide, his personal assistant. And that ended with the arrest of the personal assistant. So that actually took up a lot of time, and perhaps that's the way media narrative is driven these days. But after Delhi, we next go to Punjab in the coming days, and I know the Prime Minister and other senior leaders are planning to head across, and I think in the week to come you may see a recalibration of the narrative towards maybe the farm laws and those sorts of issues. As you know, this was also a significant diaspora related issue, which led to, I would say, serious sort of allegations made against Indian, particularly Punjabi diaspora, and specifically the Khalistan movement. So I mean, if I were to guess what the Prime Minister or the BJP narrative is going to be next week, I think it will be around these particular issues. I'm guessing that of Khalistan and similar aggressions, by external or diasporic community in India against India, and of course the opposition narrative perhaps would lean towards farm laws and agrarian issues. Two interesting points I want to sort of touch upon, which really caught my attention. Firstly, the campaign, the political discourse around Odisha was very interesting. The Prime Minister spent a lot of political capital going after the Biju Janata Dal. Of course, to put it in context, till about 6 to 7 weeks ago, the Bharatiya Janata Party and the Biju Janata Dal were actually negotiating an alliance or trying to come to an alliance, but it did not work out. But they are the sort of main contestants in Odisha. Now, specifically, the discourse has sort of gone around the Jagannath temple, the Puri Jagannath temple. Two interesting comments. One from the BJP media spokesperson and actually the candidate for the BJP in Puri, Sambit Patra, had mentioned that Lord Jagannath, who's sort of universally followed in Odisha, is a Bhakt or a follower of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, if this, most commentators have already said this, but if this was any other political party or any other person from a different party had said, for instance, Lord Ram was a Bhakt of their leader, or Lord so-and-so was a Bhakt of their leader, it would have taken a different sort of trajectory. But this sort of, was buried by and large. And the other sort of comment came from Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself. He specifically brought attention to the Jagannath temple, sort of the sanctum sanctorum, where they house or they safekeep the gold and jewelry that has been donated to the temples over 1,000 years. So the Jagannath temple was sort of built at least over 1,000 years ago, but 1,000 years ago it was sort of put back and rebuilt, and I think the structure was sort of given some renovations. So we know it's been around for 1,000 years. We know various sort of rulers, princely states, even as far as from Nepal, the kings in Nepal have donated gold and jewelry there. Now, so the Prime Minister suddenly raised this issue, which has been raked up in the past as well. Actually, it was raked up way back in 2018, where there was a question of where are the keys to this particular, room or safe space where the jewels of the Lord Jagannath are kept. And he made an interesting comment. He said, it seems like the keys to this particular room or locker or whatever it is have gone to Tamil Nadu. So meaning he was insinuating that the de facto sort of number two within the Biju Janata Dal, V.K. Pandian, who's a Tamil and who's been a very close aide and confidant, and till very recently a senior bureaucrat of the Naveen Patnaik government. He seems to have sort of taken it. I think at least that was the insinuation. Very interesting, but again, it shows that a lot of the conversations there were around the Jagannath temple, right? Whereas Prime Minister Modi and they could have really gone after economic development and other various factors in Odisha, but chose not to. So going for the sort of the, I guess, the emotional issue really, and when emotional issue overlapping religious beliefs still seems to be the playbook of the BJP, even though we are now, almost 70% through. The other very interesting piece that I wanted to mention was the interview done by News 18 with Prime Minister Modi, where he refers to himself as having been sent by God, or having been sort of, deputed by God. I don't know the exact translation, but sort of, saying that, he doesn't feel like he was actually born biologically, but somewhat sort of, sent as an avatar of God or something. So again, very interesting, I think, having to start talking in these terms on any day would make us question what is happening, why is this being said. But that too at this stage in an election, almost really, like, I feel like this is the 32nd to the 35th kilometer of a marathon, right? It's called the wall, when most people have a total mental breakdown, and most people don't make it past that 35-kilometer mark. So I think what you do is, when you train for these marathons and long runs, you really sort of tell yourself, like, you have to do it, and you start thinking that your mind is much better than your body, and the mind starts needs to pull the body through, and so on. So I feel like it's sort of maybe not an exactly good analogy, but definitely the mind games are starting to kick in, and the prime minister is also a victim to that, right? And lastly, I want to mention one thing. This is a series of interviews, and this is something I think a problem with the mainstream media. Maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a problem, I don't know. But what happens is, one person starts getting interviewed by one channel, and then suddenly, fourth day, every channel has interviewed that person, right? And last 10 days, it's been Prashant Kishore. Now, Prashant Kishore, as everyone knows who follows politics, came into sort of limelight in 2013-14, working for Mr. Modi, and he's worked for every most other parties, knows most other political systems very well, worked on the DMK campaign in 2021 in the state, and so on. So Prashant Kishore has been invited to so many interviews, and he's sort of been saying this line that he feels the BJP will return with the same number as last time, indicating that they will get a majority of about 20 seats. So 303, 304 was the number last time, if I recall correctly. What I want to say is this, right? Now, during the election campaign season, media is prohibited from publishing any exit poll or any polling data. So obviously they cannot. But then this is a nice, interesting way to like actually start telling people. So, if Ruchir or Manu or Mitali say it, it may just be their opinion. But then, starting to get experts to come and weigh in on which way do you think, what do you think? But the problem is this, right? I don't know why they're asking Prashant Kishore this question. He doesn't run a survey agency, the famous ones in India, at least, regardless of how accurate they are or otherwise, are, either CSDS, Lokniti, or I think it's called My Axis or Sea Water. There's about 6 or 7 that are usually used. But Prashant Kishore may have some data, but he's not a polling person. He's not at least known as that. So I don't know why they're going and asking him these questions, but it's really interesting that he says this. And also in the context that he has been very clear that he's setting up his own political organization, and he wants to contest in Bihar in the next election. I don't know if that's 2025 or thereabouts, but he wants to contest, and he's quite open about that, right? And that's his primary goal. So it's as good as asking any other political party leader, what do you think? Which of course they won't. But then again, I don't know, I wanted to sort of talk about all of these things, and I know it's a bunch to sort of respond to, but feel free to tell me what you think on all of this. Ruchir?
I have a view on the last. Sorry, go ahead,
Yeah,
Mitali.
just very quickly, this you sort of picked the hottest social media topics, and on the interview with News 18, I read a really cheeky tweet, Manu, that said, and this is in reference to the Prime Minister. I'm not saying I support this view, but I'm just sharing it, saying, first I thought he wasn't logical, but now it seems he's also not biological, which I thought was really funny. But Richard, jump in.
I was just going to react to the Prashant Kishore comment. So, like polls have previously not been reliable. Exit polls don't come out till the 1st of June.
Yeah.
So I've been looking for some guidance this week from the illegal betting markets, and where the numbers were around 334, 335. At the moment for BJP, like the numbers are around the 295 to 300 mark. So that's, and
they actually dipped. They dipped even more than that, Ruchir.
Is that right?
Yeah,
this is what I heard this week, basically. So
it recovered a bit.
but yeah, I think they have, and I think because it is now 5 phases I have are done. I think the confidence level on these numbers is a little bit more high, is higher. So that's where I think it looks like right now. Of course, we will see the verdict on the 4th of June. The other thing I was thinking about this week was something that Mitali brings up often. And the thing I've been thinking about is the absence of that conversation around employment. I was reading this article around the amount of unemployment, and I was wondering to myself, I realized that it does exist in a lot of manifestos, but why is it not part of why are we not talking about it? Why are more people not talking about it? Manu or Mitali, do you have a view on that? I'm curious, given the severity of the issue and so many people vote, why is there not more of a conversation around
I mean, I can respond.
employment?
Yeah, I can respond quickly, and then Manu. I'd love to hear what Manu thinks. Ruchir, I think we have to define who the we is over here, because if you look at sort of the small space of critical media, employment has been tracked quite consistently. That too, despite having that formal data. So you generally tend to look at the CMI data, which is monthly employment tracks, which has been criticized for being quite erratic and not quite a clear indicator, but that has been steadily ticking and averaging at anywhere between, I would say, 7.5% to 9%, right? So that was the first indicator. Then most recently, ILO actually came out with a report which was very, very concerning around employment figures, also pointing to the fact that within that very high double-digit unemployment figure, 80% was of the youth, which we categorize as the 18 to 25 category, right? So really, really hitting the space that should be employed. But you don't see that in most mainstream media. I think people have run sort of, not polls, but they've collated the number of shows done, for example, on prime time channels, and counted how many shows have been done on Hindu-Muslim divide versus how many have been done on unemployment. And it's almost like a 10:1 ratio, if it isn't worse. That's one pocket. And then the second pocket actually is the Congress, which has been quite explicit, I think, in its manifesto this time, talking about building more, both in terms of urban unemployment, like building a scheme around that, and also generally supporting schemes like Narega better to do something around employment. There was a recent interview, I think I missed, I can't remember the organization, where the Prime Minister referred to employment, saying we're really we're really, that's a point of focus for us. And then it comes back to the same thing. If it is a point of focus and you do believe something has happened in the last 10 years, then you should be talking about it, right? Like, you should be proud of your achievements. But obviously there's a problem there. And I'll just add one more point before I, turn to Manu, Ruchir, which I think the other one that is not getting discussed enough, but is a festering wound across North India for sure, is the Agnipath scheme. Nothing has been more damaging by way of employment schemes for people coming from rural India, particularly from northern India, where this joining the army or joining the defense services was seen as a huge guarantee towards stable employment. And the Agnipath scheme has been, honestly, it's been very damaging. And I think that's something the government is not talking about, because it probably doesn't want to, but that has hit sentiment quite hard. But Manu, what's happening in the south in terms of a conversation around unemployment?
So going back to 2014, one of the original Modi guarantees, if you remember it, was that the generation of 2 crore jobs every year, which sort of many people have now pointed out and asked whether that has actually been fulfilled, and to show data towards that. So it very much is in the government's interest as it stands today to not make unemployment come anywhere near one of the issues that are discussed. And I think that is a stark contrast we do see, right? Like, we've tracked the election over the last 15 or maybe close to 20 weeks now, and we've seen more emotional issues, more sort of quasi-religious, communal issues, but nothing to do with regard to employment. by and large, the government that drives the narrative. The government of the day drives the narrative. So I think they've made sure that quite well. They've succeeded in ensuring it's not part of the mainstream discourse. Of course, there's also a problem of institutional capture over the last few years, in terms of the erstwhile sort of independent, autonomous data statistics institutions in the country, and there's been serious allegations of even present day advisors and economic advisory council members fudging data and sort of doing enough to help the government narrative rather than giving um, critical, constructive, and independent feedback to the government. So I think that's the broader issue, and as Mitali said, the ILO report is there, and there's other sort of CMIE data, almost I think monthly reports which tell you about what is happening, but none of this ends up making it to the mainstream media, from what I can tell. Would you have any particular reason or thought process on this, Ruchir, why this doesn't make it to the heart of the election debate?
I think actually you answered it well. I mean, I genuinely, it was a question, so I was thinking about and I think because it is not, because the government is not doing as well, they're basically not talking about it, and we've already discussed how good they are at setting the narrative. The Agnipath scheme is interesting, Mitali. For the last 2 months, I've been indirectly working on it because somebody wants to set up an energy company that only employs Agnipath graduates, for lack of a better phrase. And what I learned through that exercise is um, there are folks within the army extremely motivated to find a way to build employment bridges. The government seems to be motivated around signing MOUs to find employment for the folks coming out of the scheme. But the practical reality is that there aren't enough jobs to begin with to be able to absorb the folks coming out. I think there is a big gap in terms of the vision of what how that would play out versus the practical reality of what happens to these graduates. So
Yeah.
they really have to find folks to employ these
Yeah.
young people.
I mean, first they have to convince people that this is worth it, honestly. But
Yeah.
I want to quickly come in on what I've been tracking with the elections, and I want both your thoughts on it. And I guess mine is a bit more geeky. One is in our continuing sort of observations on the election commission, and I'd love to hear from Manu on this, on their recent note around Form 17 and sort of sharing voter data. And the other one was an interesting observation, and I must sort of preface this by saying that I think the author of it is a member of the Indian National Congress, but he is a data um, not scientist, but at least sort of data is his space. And he wrote an interesting piece talking about how the voter turnout has fallen from 2019. And when I say voter turnout, I don't mean, percentage. I mean absolute numbers. So in 115, that's close to 30% of the Lok Sabha constituencies, a fewer number of people have come out to vote than in 2019. The reason this raises eyebrows is because, first of all, it's almost unparalleled in India's election history, and the second thing is, by nature of the population growth you see in India, every 5 years you would expect to see a greater number of voters come out to vote. The population increases, there's more people above 18 who are now eligible to vote. And you haven't seen that this time round. I think in the polling phases so far, in 2019, for example, if you saw a 12% increase in voters, this time round it's as low as 4%. And the other, I guess, worrisome observation within that was that many of these constituencies where he has seen that are either constituencies where the opposition did well the last time round or was expected to do well. So if you had to cut the reasons why this is falling, it could either be a fall in electorate, which is, it's a bit tough to explain unless there have been like really sudden deaths recorded in that particular constituency, or emigration, which again is tough to explain in large numbers, or a drop in turnout, which means how come these particular constituencies saw such a fall in turnout? There doesn't seem to be a clear reason for it, but it is a worrying trend for a country which you would expect, with a growing population, to keep seeing growing numbers in terms of people coming not people coming out to vote, but voters themselves. Manu, any thoughts on that? I mean, on that form 17, which
Yeah.
which made
So
people very uncomfortable.
both are interlinked. So I'll address it generally because the voter turnout on the voter participation has been sort of can we say a little less than expected, but then it hasn't been an exciting election in that sense, right? People, maybe it is just reflection of we don't have the kind of issues or the kind of leaders or leadership that has excited people to turn out. Like, I'm just going back to a different country and a different time, but bear with me. 2008, we saw in the US elections people who had never voted. There was I remember a woman who was almost 100 years, African American woman, who came and said, "This is the first time I'm voting in an election in the United States," right? She'd never voted because I think Obama and the campaign he ran really captivated people. It made people want to come and vote for him and identify with his presidency and so on. So maybe it is there is a deficit in that sense from the political leadership space, or from maybe people are losing also trust with the election process. Maybe they feel like, what is the point? It's all sort of a done deal. It's fait accompli. I don't know. Or is it a reflection of the long winding election, which is quite new also, over a 2.5 month period. And we've pretty much like stretched our entire podcast across the 6 phases so far. So I think it could be multitude of one or many of these factors. See, Form 17C, I think it is called, is the voting data, but you can get it. The parties get it because all our candidates and our agents, the candidates' agents, get a copy, receive a copy. So let's go back. Prior to voting, constituent data, also the parties and the candidates get. Though you cannot go and type in, say, for example, South Delhi, and say I want to see all the electors. I mean, what I'm saying, I'm not saying it's you can't see it now on the Election Commission website, but the South Delhi candidates can get a copy of the entire voter list, constituency voter list, for free. That's mandated to be given once you enter as a candidate, and they give it, I think, in a physical copy and a CD. So what I'm trying to say is, so a lot of us already have it, and for the big parties like the BJP or the Congress, anyway, they have it, right? And you could probably extend an argument saying, I'm sure Congress is looking into every single constituency very closely. Congress meaning Congress, allies, India bloc, plus supporters, well-wishers, everyone, right? So it is nobody's case that any constituency is going to go unchecked. But we are on a different sort of question here. How open, how transparent, how public the Election Commission of India wants to be. Because today, the Election Commission of India puts up every candidate's affidavit online. So you can, if sitting in Chennai, I can look up the Amethi candidate or the West Bengal constituency candidates election affidavit saying what assets they own, what liabilities they have, how many cases are filed against them, and so on. Now, when that part is open and transparent, why should a South Chennai voter know what is happening in Kolkata or North Mumbai? With the same, I guess, argument, you can extend it to after elections. Maybe a South Chennai voter may be interested in understanding how North Mumbai voted, right? It's not entirely unfathomable. So if the Election Commission can do the A, why don't they do B? So in order to get to the bottom of this, you need to understand why they do A, which is to publish all the election candidate affidavits. The simple answer is there's a 2003 Supreme Court judgment which says you must do that. It's part of Article 19, the right to know, right? So put it other way, the Election Commission has been forced to do that. So the Election Commission, being a body which will not do anything unless it's been directed by the court to, in all probability, at some point, they may disclose all the voter turnout details, but they will wait for a court order. In that sense, the larger issue with the Election Commission is it is still running as if it is a government bureaucratic agency, right? We will only do this, but if you go get a court order, then we will do this plus this, right? But is that the kind of election commission that the constitution envisages? No, the constitution says it is an independent constitutional body which has entire and complete superintendence of running and managing elections, and also sort of almost de facto helping run the state machinery when during the model code of conduct and so on, right? So definitely I think the election commission needs to really understand what its intrinsic inherent powers are and start doing things in the larger interest of the country, rather than we will wait for a court direction for us to reveal some data. Until that, the primary typical government agency, government department mindset is, we will tell the court we cannot do it, we don't need to do it, so we won't do it, right? I think that's a deeply problematic sort of, I guess, architecture that we have unfortunately created. And I think the Election Commission, which is the primary body, needs to be sort of freed from that architecture into sort of being like a, we are a top, like it has to be almost, I don't know if this is a segue thing, but it has to be like a Reserve Bank of India, right? It has to be seen as an independent body with its own sort of drive and its own experts and its own sort of decisions. It should be looking at other countries, what are the best practices you have here, what are the best practices we have, and so on and so forth. But anyway, it's long-winded rant, but it, I think, comes down to how the Election Commission views itself in a way.
Ruchir, any final words from you, or
No,
shall we?
that was such a natural segue. I mean, we should just move to the next issue.
should.
Well played, Manu. Well played.
We should. And though we want the Election Commission of India to be more like the Reserve Bank of India, it's also a double-edged sword, because we are now going to talk about why the Reserve Bank of India has started becoming less independent, less expert-driven, less world-class. Of course, I think the loss of or erosion of autonomy and independence of the Reserve Bank of India is something that has really bothered many of us over the last many years. We've talked about institution capture, and I think a short history of what's happened within the Reserve Bank of India with the senior leadership there over the last 5-6 years, before and after demonetization exercise, all indicates that this is not the Reserve Bank of India that we all held and hold so highly. But I mean, the recent issues seem much more sort of concerning as well, right? I mean, the huge sort of, I guess, can I call it a windfall for the union government from the surplus funds, on the basis of the Economic Capital Framework, the ECF, under the on the basis of the Bimal Jalan Committee. This has again raised questions, numerous questions about the Reserve Bank of India's functioning. So let me go straight to Mitali, because Mitali, I think, can you set out not just the solution, but also like the entire problem statement, and tell us, like, why we should all be sort of more worried than, someone like me who's just concerned about institutional autonomy loss?
Yeah. I think, Manu, to start off with, the RBI is a slightly different beast in that it has sometimes had, people at the helm that are not civil servants, that are not bureaucrats. So it's had some very high-profile faces leading the charge, and I think it's been a bit different with the RBI from other institutions, because it's almost been like a slow grab in, sort of poking at this and poking at that, and then large bursts where you saw these individual clashes. So the first big one, as you outlined, was between Dr. Raghuram Rajan and then Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, where there were serious differences about how much interference the RBI would take from the finance ministry. The finance ministry on its side felt that the RBI was just not sort of getting it. And it's not to say that there haven't been personality clashes amongst other parties. P. Chidambaram as well had clashes with some of the former RBI governors. But you didn't see a situation where an RBI governor walked away, and you didn't see a situation where the RBI actually had to bend to whatever the finance ministry or the minister's wishes were. It started with Raghuram Rajan. There seemed to be serious differences on what the role of the RBI should be. He quit. That was followed by Urjit Patel, who was seen as someone who was quite close to, Mr. Jaitley and quite close to the finance ministry. Again, over there were very, very serious differences, and he stepped away. And then there was a fairly explosive interview, I remember, given at that point by the RBI Deputy Governor Viral Acharya, talking about the level of interference that there was. The entire situation sort of completely flattened out once you had the new current RBI governor in place, that's Shaktikanta Das. And for many people, I think it's almost like it's a wallpaper approach. It's sort of a do nothing approach, so it's been very, very tentative, and it's not the same RBI that many of us who've tracked the financial markets remember for taking strong decisions, for taking decisions that sometimes neither the stock market nor the finance ministry liked, but were taken for the health of the economy. Now, having said that, a little bit of context on this particular situation, which is that there was the suggestion made, and I think it started with late Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, about the fact that RBI sits on really large surplus reserves. Can something be done with those reserves? Can that money be handed to the government to be put towards different causes? There was a lot of debate about that. And in 2018, if I recall, there was a new economic capital framework set up as per the Bimal Jalan Committee suggestion. The idea over there was that a certain amount of surplus reserves would be transferred to the government for their use, while maintaining something called a contingent risk buffer. So a CRB for the RBI to dip into at times of any emergency and otherwise, just as sort of a safety measure. That figure was set at about 5.5% of its balance sheet, with I think the ability to go up to 6.5% as a situation or events would demand it. I won't get into the debate at that point because it's a little bit like water under the bridge. It's a decision that was taken, and for year after year after that, the RBI has actually been transferring pretty handsome figures to the government of India. It has been sitting on surpluses, which it has earned through various investments, and it has done that this time. I think the surprise this time is the size of the figure. Even the government hadn't budgeted it, so it's a whopper of a figure. They have transferred about 1 lakh crores, I think. They earned a lot of that on foreign currency sales. They earned some of it on foreign bond holdings, revaluation of gold reserves. So different things have gone into the mix. And now the question is, what do you do with that? Do you spend it? Do you use it to clean up your own balance sheet, i.e., lower the fiscal deficit? So there's a couple of options. But before I get into a little bit more, maybe it's a good time to get Ruchir's thoughts in, and then I can talk about, what could be done with this money. Ruchir, you've been tracking this story as well.
Yeah, actually 1.76 lakh crores. It's like,
1.7.
as in, it is so insane. It's almost double the last time. And I was thinking, how does RBI actually make money? I think one of the places they've benefited greatly is the deal they've been able to do with Russia and Iran around not having to buy fuel in dollars, which means that there hasn't been downward pressure on the government having to buy or RBI having to buy dollars. Clearly, they are now starting to become a meaningful income source for the government. And that, I think, is the interesting question. Should a central bank of the country be one of the biggest sources of revenue for the government. I think,
So, what do you see
like,
as the role as the central bank? Maybe you can you
yeah,
deviate
so
come back?
ideally, the primary situation, like the primary role should be fiscal management, as in they should be thinking about the economy and the consequences of the economy, like joblessness, for example. And by being a primary source of revenue, that sort of moves the incentive of the government to push the RBI towards doing more to provide more, because it needs to balance its budget. So the what I'm really saying is the interests of an independent RBI are not the same as the interests of a government uh, influence RBI, mainly around revenue. I personally think any extra money in the system that can be used for the welfare of the people, that should be used. But I don't know what the best way to handle this relationship is. Anyway, Mitali, perhaps you can go back to like what your thought was around the independence.
Yeah. I mean, I will say on the point you made and the point you asked, Manu, about what is the role of the Reserve Bank. I think, one is what are the standard features of an organization. So you can say controlling inflation, keeping a check on banks, ensuring the financial system is healthy, that the interests of consumers, investors, depositors are constantly protected. And then there's the other stuff which really sort of reflects the level of independence. So I know this one has sort of fallen into the cracks, but it shouldn't, which is the electoral bond issue. And if you were to go back when this bond idea was even floated, there was vehement criticism of it by the Reserve Bank, because they essentially saw it for what it was. It was like a blank check almost, right? So there was a lot of criticism at that point. We've seen in the past, and we've talked about issues like Paytm, where it looks like it is not just a haphazard management running a really large enterprise, but it is also sort of consistent miscommunication between the central bank and some of these startups around what guardrails should be set and what guardrails should be held. So I think in that there has been dilution. The other thing is, I don't know, but I'm not sure if it is the sign of a robust economy or government if you're depending on dividend income to bail you out. Because it looks great for the last few years, but there could be a year when it doesn't look as great. So what really happens for the government to, to think about more cogent solutions for raising revenues for itself? With this money, where could it go? It could go in a couple of places. The stock market, I know, sort of rallied because they're hoping this means greater government spend on capex. Basically, it means more infrastructure projects. Hopefully,
Hmm.
that will build more employment. That's one way to go. The other way to go, like I said, is just lower all your borrowing. Cut down your fiscal deficit, which again for the macro economy could be good. But then there's some other points that people have raised, thinking about tax cuts for salaried classes, thinking about a recalibration of GST, which is really important. Households are feeling the pinch. Debt levels have risen. People are taking more personal loans, and I'm not talking about a vehicle loan or a house loan. Personal loans are increasing, which means people are taking on debt to run their households, and savings are actually falling. Can people be given some kind of tax relief? That's something to think about. Can projects be created so as to both generate employment and also generate returns for the government? And then the final one I'll say is just to go back to my same point. The problem with these very large 1 lakh crore plus figures is, what happened to disinvestment? What happened to divestment? What happened to all those other plans of the government cutting away from, cutting the flab away and trying to become a leaner organization? I mean, dividend is great, but as Ruchir would also agree, as an entrepreneur, I don't know if that's something you want to depend on a long term basis, for the health of your economy or the health of your country's finances.
I have a political question, Manu, on what Mitali just said, which is, can we ever be in a situation in India, at least in the near future, 5 to 10 years, where a government, because of a surplus it receives, actually reduces tax burden on its people? My assumption is that politically they would never do it because we are so built on welfare, or the idea of awarding welfare to the masses. Politically, do you think that's even possible?
So no, the politically, I think wealth redistribution, that idea, that concept, that fundamental doctrine is here to stay. Not just here, but across the world. Um, but whether this can be used to sort of ameliorate and reduce some of the pains that Mitali had sort of listed out, that people, the average common citizen, is suffering, is certainly possible, and how they do it, right? And I guess that is also part of the problem. We've not had enough discourse around that. We've not, just like we've not had enough discourse around unemployment or solutions towards it. Okay, you could argue that Congress has an apprenticeship plan and other things, but we don't have enough clarity on where this surplus funds, which of course give a huge sort of financial bonanza and great sort of liquidity to the union government's finances, where they will be spent. I've just pulled out a graph from the Economic Times article, which quotes the RBI. So can one of you guys explain this to me, please? The year-wise sort of payout to the center is not at all even. So I'll just tell you. So in 2019, financial year 2019, it was 1.76 lakh crore. Next year, 2020 was 57,000. The next year, 2021 financial year, was 99,000. The year after, FY 2022, was 30,000, and then it is 87,000. And this year, financial year 24, it's 210,000. Just to sort of, that's the RBI data. How can it sort of be so inconsistent?
Manu, because it's dividend, it's literally what the RBI is earning on its own investment, so to speak. So, if you were to break it up on what happened this year, some of it is interest on foreign bond holdings. The figures I've seen is around 1.4 trillion went from there. Some of it is the forex gains, where I think they probably sold at 83, if I'm not mistaken, to the dollar, and they made some profits there. There's gold revaluation gain, which is more than 60,000 crores. There's interest on government bond holdings. There's, so it's a number of little items, and that really sort of varies the figure that they get in. I mean, I remember seeing an article in 2019 saying highest ever, but that highest ever has increased, so the dividend is increasing, which is great. There is no cap to it, and neither is there any guarantee of what the figure will look like.
So
And
let me say,
yeah,
the difference between 22, financial year 22
yeah,
and financial year 24 is almost 7x.
yeah.
Is that sort of understandable? Are you guys, surely this doesn't sound, shouldn't the RBI have some sort of idea of how much it will make every year from these dividends? Or is it just so many other global factors that are hard to...
My instinctive reaction, Manu, is it's a reflection of the US interest rates, and they have really jumped between 2022 and now, and we do hold a big chunk of our reserves in the dollar, so
Yeah.
we're probably beneficiary of the treasury increase for sure. Gold prices have gone up in between these 2 years quite significantly. I mean, last month and a half alone, gold has added as much in market cap as like all of Bitcoin combined. So there are some meaningful, sizable changes that are different right now in the global economy, and so that definitely has an impact.
Ruchir, I just want to
Yeah.
quickly, respond to the point you made about political leeway to make those decisions. I think it's also a reality that a large part of the government's revenue accretion over the last few financial years is thanks to taxes. They are really making big earnings on taxes. I think we've talked on the show about how GST is beginning to pinch people, personal income taxes, of course. So I think at some point you got to, they've got to sort of take a check on what the threshold is, what's happening in the larger economy to households, and whether or not this much tax burden, if you want to call it that, but these sort of earnings are going to continue. And in that sense, I think there could be a case made, especially for the lower and the middle income stratas, to give them a little bit of relief. You have that money. Can you hold on to that money and say, in lieu of this large surplus that I've got, I'm going to put some relief into the system? I know it could have inflation implications, but there are also debt implications right now for households.
The thing about fiscal discourse is it's complex, and sometimes in a world where there are so many different threads pulling you in different directions, especially given what happened with what the US government did to Russia in terms of sanctions and banned its ability to use dollars, and how we think about, how does the RBI now think about its reserves in dollars, because the US government could do that to anybody. In that kind of an environment, RBI's independence and the ability to operate um, thinking about the best interest of the Indian economy is quite important to its future. But at the same time, if I was, if in my portfolio I had a high performing bank, my expectation from them would be to increase their dividends every year, because I want my share value or my worth to go more. So RBI is in such a complex place in terms of trying to manage the expectations from the government versus what's good for the Indian economy. That is what I think. This question is not an easy one to answer.
Look, I think it's a fantastic add-on or part of the election camp, something to sort of make this whole season more interesting. So I'm glad you guys brought this topic on. Shall we move to Have You Heards now, which is a section that we do where we look at what each of us have sort of seen, read, or listened to in the last 1 week that we would love to share with others and world at large. So do you want to go in this order? Ruchir first, then Mitali, and then I'll have the last one.
Sure, Manu. I read a story today that really surprised me. Omar bin Omran, an Algerian man, disappeared 26 years ago and was discovered alive in the cellar of his neighbor's house in Algeria. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I remember reading a story like this in the States where somebody vanished for 13 years. When he vanished, the Algerian civil war was on, so his family had assumed that he was either kidnapped or killed. But turns out somebody saw him and tipped the local police that he's still alive at the neighbor's house. And he was found 200 meters from the family's home, which was, I think, the most surprising out of this. The alleged captor is a 61-year-old man who's been now charged with kidnapping. And imagine the psychological damage of this. Like, Omar's mother gave up on finding him and passed away in 2013. It is really strange stories like these. Obviously the disappearance of the airplane, the Air Malaysia, like some of these stories in 2024 are really shocking. I was very surprised that someone could be disappeared for 26 years.
I'm so glad they found
him.
Yeah. My Have You Heard is courtesy a co-podcaster, which is Manu, who sent me this really lovely video a couple of days back, which is an advertisement by Louis Vuitton that features two of my most favorite people in the world, one more than the other, Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer, sitting on this really fancy Louis Vuitton trunk in the snow-clad mountains and having a conversation about life and leadership and what their memories of each other are. I think I sort of keep going back to these two sports people because and especially as a mother of two children, a son and a daughter, it's really rare, I feel now, to find sort of people to look up to and to point your children towards, saying, these are the role models and this is how to sort of, these are the values to model yourself on. And I think both these tennis personalities have really built themselves as role models, not just for their excellence in sport, which is outstanding. It's for how they come across as human beings. It's for how they have played as rivals. It's the respect that they've treated each other with. I think it's phenomenal. It's a life lesson, the two of them. The humility that they approach their craft with, and the respect that they have for each other. It's something else. So thank you, Manu. And I hope everyone sort of looks up that ad. It's a nice long 8-9 minute. So sit back and enjoy it and just soak it in when you watch it. Manu,
Yeah,
you're
and
next.
just to add on to that, I think watching Nadal and Federer talk about the last 18 or so years of their rivalry, like fierce as it was at its very peak, and with the greatest amount of humility and civility between, and of course with oodles of respect for each other. I think it's also sort of such a great advertisement for the sport itself. I mean, this is how it should be played, hard on the field, and then, should be able to be friends and, look at each other and have respect for each other. So in many ways, I think it's a fantastic lesson for everyone. My have you heard is, again, just because we've done so much discussion on Indian elections, I wanted to sort of bring up the UK elections, which have now been called. So interesting because, Rishi Sunak has called for what is considered an extremely early election, several months, before when it should be held. Most people I spoke to, were expecting a November election, but he's called it for July. Now, just the context of this is the Conservative Party, the Tories, have been in power since 2010. So they've had a pretty good run of 14 years. And the two recent polls that I looked at had placed them behind the Labour Party by 24% and 37%. So it looks like a pretty, like a huge massacre in terms of what they will face at the polls come July. But it's a long time away, and anything can happen. But this is what I wanted to focus: two things, one serious, one not so. See, whenever you look up what are the key elections, when you look up commentators in the UK, the British commentators and European commentators, you'll say they spoke about three or four things, right? One, economy, two, immigration with the whole like refugee Rwanda issue, environment, and healthcare, right? Again, none of these four issues, unfortunately, we've been able to speak enough during the Indian election campaign season for the last 5-6 weeks or longer. So I think again just shows that I think how different countries approach elections. And we even briefly discussed about how so emotional issues always take priority in India. The other very interesting and somewhat non-serious part of this election, which I was following with great sort of interest, cheekily if I may say so, was former England cricketer Monty Panesar. He decided to contest, and he was part of this Workers' Party of Great Britain. I hadn't heard much of it, for a traditionally sort of Indian Asian seat of Ealing Southall, which is near Heathrow in West London. And of course, Monty Panesar being a cricketer, I don't know how much he'd engaged with politics before, but there were a series of interviews where they just sort of, kept stumping him ball after ball, question after question. But sort of the funniest part is, I think, one of his earlier interviews on Mastermind was brought up where, I don't know, there's a series of 14 or 15 questions where he knows the answer to none of them. But this was way back in 2019. If any of you need like any level of comic relief, just look up Monty Panesar Mastermind interview from, I think, 2019, and the commentary around it. It is, it is hilarious. The sad part is Monty, after 1 week of campaigning and election aspiration, decided to withdraw as a candidate. So we won't have Monty in July, but I thought this is a good time to sort of recall, this little political contribution of our good old cricketing left arm orthodox bowler. So On that note,
Manu, the other golden moment has been the headlines in the UK newspapers. I'm not sure who advised him to do that and why the Prime Minister on hold now chose to step out without an umbrella in that pouring rain. But just the kind of news headlines we had were hilarious. And if you're looking for these videos, on Twitter, there's a handle called Larry the Cat, who apparently stays at the Prime Minister's residence. And Larry the Cat has tweeted saying, a lot of you were looking for me, but I was obviously home because I wouldn't step out without an umbrella. I'm not that stupid. So it was just, everyone really had a blast with it. I don't know what that PR moment was.
The Monty story evoked my own journey in student politics. It is so unforgiving. I was just thinking, you really have to practice. The reason why these career politicians do well is because they had a go in when they were students. They had a go in the local constituency. Then they get to try. It's very hard to just parachute in. Anyway. Thank you. On that note, this is the end of episode 17. We're grateful that you're still here with us. If you have any feedback, please do email us or contact us on Twitter. Our email is indiadialoguepodcast@gmail.com. On Twitter, you can find us on TID, the India Dialogue, TID_podcast. Or you can find us on India Dialogue Podcast on YouTube. Manu on Twitter is at Manuraj1983. Mitali is at Mitali Live. I am at Ruchir_P. Thank you again for listening and see you in a week. Bye.